welcome to the Midland Public Library's International Women's Day celebration. This month, we've chosen to celebrate women with a series of interviews, candid conversations with women in unique careers. You can join us every Monday for these special events at 7 p.m. My name is Jennifer Paquette, and I'm the Adult and Teen Services Coordinator here at MPL, and I'll be your host for this event. A few housekeeping items off the top. All the microphones have been turned off, and also please be aware that we are recording this session. We encourage audience questions, so please feel free to drop these into the chat box. Likewise, if you're experiencing any technical difficulties, you can let me know in the chat and I will do my best to help. I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. Midland Public Library acknowledges and is thankful for the opportunity to work on the traditional territory of the Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabe, which includes the Chippewa, Ojibwe, Potawatomi, and Odawa people. We especially acknowledge the Chippewa of Bosley First Nation and Rama First Nation, who were the stewards of the lands in and around this area. We also recognize the Métis nationhood currently represented in our community by the Georgian Bay Métis Council. We recognize and deeply respect their ongoing and historic connection to these lands. These connections need to be clearly and overtly articulated as part of our collective agreement to make the promise and challenge of truth and reconciliation real in our community. We're so pleased to be hosting Ainsley as our next guest in this series. Ainsley studied at Queen's University to obtain her Bachelor's of Applied Sciences in Engineering Physics, and shortly after graduation, Ainsley found an opportunity to grow and advance her skills at Innovative Automation in Barrie. Throughout her 4 years there, she's held a few different positions, ultimately resulting in the position of Machine Vision Specialist. Using her unique knowledge and skill set, Ainsley supports various project departments within the company and throughout the length of a project. Outside of work, Ainsley has enjoyed becoming part of the Barrie community through community theater with Kemp and Quilt community players, volleyball and softball leagues, and rock climbing. Wow, you do a lot. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Ainsley Hobart. Ainsley, thanks for being here tonight. We're so thrilled to have you to help us celebrate International Women's Day and to your willingness to share your career journey with us. So on that note, let's jump right in. And my first question is, you're a machine vision specialist with Innovative Automation. What is that? And what does a typical workday look like for you?
So a typical workday for me changes every day. So that's one of the most interesting parts about my job. But in general, so I work in automation. The company that I work for makes automation lines. We don't manufacture parts like your typical plant would, but we make the machines that we then deliver to the plants to manufacture the parts. My component of that is I program cameras. So there's a couple different things that you can use cameras for. It can be used for a quality inspection or robot guidance. Those are usually the two main things. But yeah, so that's my component of it. So I work designing the system and programming the system as well. So yeah.
And when we were chatting the first time, you were sort of mentioning that you are the only one in the company who does this.
Yeah, so I work with primarily inside the controls programming department because it's ultimately their responsibility to program the cameras. So I don't program every camera. Some of them are programmed by the controls programmers, but I'm the only one that coordinates with sales and design to make sure that we spec up an appropriate system for the project.
And for those of us like myself, when we say automation, so we're talking robotics here, right?
Most in part, yes. It's not all robotics. There's other types of automation, but yes, when you think of automation, the number one thing people think of is robotics. Yeah.
And what are some of the projects that you've worked on? Like what kinds of manufacturers are getting your product that you're working on?
Primarily automotive, so car parts. I've done a few lines that make either headlamps or tail lamps for cars. So we looked at to make sure they're lighting up properly. I've also worked on some pharmaceutical lines. So for example, like a DNA test kit. So building, kind of assembling like the swab and the cap and putting the liquid inside and screwing the cap onto the tube and stuff like that. So
neat. Yeah, I can't wait to hear how you got into this. Did you want to, on that note, did you always want to be an engineer or work in automation?
So always no. I didn't really know what engineering was until I was in grade nine, later in grade nine. My brother, who is 3 years older than me, was deciding where he was going to go to university. And he was in grade 12 at the time, and he decided to go into engineering. So my brother's an electrical engineer, and when he told me that he, was applying for engineering, I was like, "What's engineering? Like, I'd never heard of this before." I was from a small town, and my parents worked. My mom was a dental assistant, and my dad's a nurse, so like very more stereotypical jobs, and not so much in like, what is engineering? I had no idea. He's basically explained it as it's like a theoretical or like a real world application of theoretical science. And that can mean so many different things, but it's just that application to the real world. I'm like, well, that sounds cool. So then, he went to university, and I, just kind of paid attention to what he was doing. And that's kind of was like, I could do that. Like, that sounds like a lot of fun. Like, you can do different types. There's electrical, mechanical, civil, so many different things. So there was just so many options in terms of engineering. So I was like, yeah, let's do that. In terms of automation, I did not plan to get into automation by any means. I started working at a factory while I was in school, like when I was in university. So like my summers between semesters. Mm-hmm. And then I ended up finding my way to Innovative. And that's where I started learning about automation and getting more involved in that.
Nice. So let's chat a little bit more about that journey to get where you are. Can you go over a little bit more of your education and training? So you went to Queen's and that first job at a school and how it led you to
For sure.
automation?
So my education in itself is very diverse. It's one of the most unique, I would say, disciplines of engineering. Where we have, it's engineering physics with a mechanical option is ultimately what I took at school. So I had basically three main subsets of courses: your traditional, critical thinking engineering courses. And then I had my theoretical physics courses. And then I also had my mechanical engineering courses as well. So it kind of left me feeling like I wasn't really prepared for any job. It was a very good base, but I didn't feel like I was qualified for anything out there. So I had gone back to the factory that I had been working at a couple of summers in the past. And I started working there. But it really, it wasn't really a long-term growth situation. Like, I didn't really feel like I was advancing at all. And so I was, looking for other opportunities. And that's when I found Innovative. I owe it to that company for the fact that I found Innovative, because they asked me to look into getting them a robot to pick parts out of their plastic molding machines. And when they found Innovative, I was like, wonder what their careers page looks like. So, so I found myself talking to Innovative and getting to know more about the automation world and what they did. And I was fortunate to have a conversation with the president of Innovative Automation, who was asked me if I was interested in filling a 6-month contract with the intention of moving on to being part of the company full time afterwards. But they were having difficulties filling this 6-month contract, but they saw a lot of potential in me, and they wanted to give me the opportunity to learn in that position as well as to further into the company. So yeah.
Prime example of how one opportunity can lead to another.
Absolutely.
And what were some of those? You weren't always the machine vision specialist. What were some of those beginner entry positions at Innovative Automation that you held?
So I started with the 6-month contract doing computer software development. Mm-hmm. So I was just programming some simple internal applications. I had no history of computer programming except for one course that I took while I was at university. So they gave me a couple weeks to kind of learn it, and then I took off running. So that's where I started. And then at my previous company, I had been involved with some continuous improvement initiatives. So I then became the continuous improvement coordinator at Innovative and helped them build kind of a process for them to kind of take ideas from the company and filter through them and analyze whether they were valuable investments or not. So then once I had done that for about 8 months, then I kind of handed that off to somebody else to maintain. And then I started in the controls department. And then after about 6 to 8 months in the controls department is when we created the special position, the unique position of machine vision specialist. The intention when I joined the department was always to focus on vision, but the actual, in terms of the full need of the dedicated position, wasn't really fully understood until I started doing the work, and then the value was seen. So then I had a conversation with my manager and I was like, hey, do you think this would make sense? Because I do. so then we kind of worked together and we created the job description together, and then that's the position I still hold.
Fantastic. It's a great story and a lot of really valuable input in there. So women make up only 28% of the workforce in science, technology, engineering, and math. Was this an obstacle that you faced in your education and career? And what has it meant for your career journey?
I don't think it's been an obstacle for me. I feel like I have had all of the opportunity that anyone else that I've known has had. So personally, I don't feel like it's ever gotten in my way. I mean, it obviously has had impact, whether it's from the way that other people behave around you, or the way that you can perceive the way that, that you can perceive something that somebody says, and you always have that thought in the back of your mind is, was that because of my gender? And it's something that's really hard to get away from, because the bias is there. It's out there somewhere. It's just a question of, is it impacting that person? So for me, it's, it has had minimal negative impact, but it's always something that sits in the back of your mind. When I started into at Innovative, when I started getting into the more, standard roles, like when I started moving towards controls programming, for example, it's very much a male dominated industry. It's a male dominated company, and it's definitely an entirely male department prior to my entering it. So it was an interesting dynamic to enter. But the higher ups of the company were very supportive, obviously, of giving me the opportunities to learn. I had no idea how to do anything that I do for my job before I got hired. Like they saw me for the potential that I had, in terms of my ability to learn. And that's ultimately what I see engineering as, is the ability to think critically, and it's a thought process more than it is a knowledge base of theory. So the owner of Innovative pulled me into his office early on. I think it was like less than a year that I had been at the company. And, young 23-year-olds like, oh, this, he's telling you wants to talk to me. This is so scary. But he was like, hey, I just wanted to check in with you, see how you're settling in. We have a volleyball team, you should go talk to this person. They can, hook you up. You can hang out with some people, get to know people. It'll be great. I'm like, okay, cool. Like, this is okay. I can relax. This is just, chill conversation. And then he started talking about how he wanted to make sure that I understood that, that Innovative hires based on skill. And it's hard to see that they're not basing anything off of gender by the disparity of the population of women in the company. But his explanation is that it's hard to hire 50% of your staff from 5% of your options. It's just that the women aren't applying. So, when you hire based purely on skill, if you don't have as many women, you can't hire as many women. And it's totally valid, and it makes complete sense. And I really appreciated him taking the time to make sure that I understood that, so that it wasn't something that I was concerned about. It kind of took a little bit of that weight off the back of my mind of why am I the only one? So
that's a really great conversation for a manager to have with you, especially given the culture. So to compare that to school then for you, what was your cohort like when you were in university? Were there very many women in your program?
In my department specifically, not very many. There was 5 women that graduated in my class of 60. But in the engineering department as a whole, it was pretty well on par. Some departments tend to have larger female interests than others, and there's really no, explanation that I can really understand as to why. But some of the disciplines like chemical tend to have a greater than 50% female occupancy. Mechanical is usually on par 50-50. But some of the more like electrical and physics side of things are typically fewer females, but they're also smaller in general. So yeah, there's no real reason as to why. I don't really know, but I never really felt that it was anything that was, impeding me in any way. I feel like all of my classmates treated everyone equally, and you were judged on your contribution to a group project and nothing else. So
well, that's good. I'm glad that you've had a positive experience with that. For sure. Can you share an interesting story that's happened to you since you started your career? Could be an interesting project or media coverage.
So probably one of the most interesting things is that I've been on TV a couple times for Innovative and in some magazines and stuff. So that's been interesting. There was a film crew that came in, and it was, I want to say maybe like a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years now, that came in, and they were doing a segment on young workers. And so they wanted to, have a conversation with me because I was, fairly young, and I think I had just started the machine vision specialist stuff. And so that was probably one of the coolest things. And there was a commercial that was running on TV. And then I think that ran about a year and a half ago is when it finally was like running on TV. And I had people text me like, I just saw you on TV. I'm like, yeah, you did. But it was really cool.
Especially as an actor, I would imagine that would be neat.
Yeah, I actually, I went to one of my rehearsals for the musical I was in last year, and they're like, so in other news, Ainsley was on TV, and I was like, oh God, everyone's staring at me. But yeah, it was funny. So yeah, so that's probably one of the cooler things I've done. And I've, worked on some cool projects too, but it's probably one of the more unique ones.
Nice. Do you have any interesting or little known facts about engineering, robotics, or automation that you'd like to share with us?
Little known facts. I mean, probably, I would say probably one of the more interesting, I guess, theory things is that actually had a very interesting impact today was, it's called the color wheel. So colors on the same side of the color wheel, so like your oranges, your yellows, your reds, will reflect similar wavelengths of light. So a colored object is actually colored because it's reflecting that wavelength of light. So a red object's reflecting red light back to your eyes. If it's on the opposite side of the color wheel, so for example, green being on the opposite side from red does not reflect red light as much as it would blue or green light. So I was working today with some red lights, and I had just painted my nails last night. And actually one of my nails is purple and the others are green. And so I put my hand in the red light and noticed that these bright green nails were really, really dark because they weren't reflecting the red light. And I was just like, well, that's cool. So anyways, that was an interesting thing that, I mean, had a weird impact today. But yeah, so the color wheel is probably one of the more interesting things. So,
and I think you've mentioned it too, that correct me if I'm wrong, because my brain is not wired this way, but you can use those different colored lights to make an object seem colored.
Yes.
Like,
so
right.
Yeah, so you can take multiple colors of lights and create a color image with a monochrome camera. So the camera can only see black and white, but it can, in the software, if you take a series of pictures with a red light, a green light, a blue light, a white light, a yellow light, usually you have like a UV light and like an infrared light as well, so outside the visible spectrum. And then you map all of that together in the software. It can then, based on how those objects reflected the light, like I said, a red object will reflect the red light and a blue object will reflect the blue light. It can then map and tell you what color that it actually is by overlaying all those images together.
That's incredible. I'm sitting here just in awe and feeling like a little bit smarter just hearing you talk and explain it. Can you share a story about a funny mistake that you made when you were first starting out and what lesson you learned from that?
Yeah. So, I mean, the age old joke about photographers and, forgetting to take the lens cap off a camera. So I work with cameras, but they're usually a little bit different than the type of camera that you'd think of. So one of the cameras that I work with has a clear plastic cover on the front of it. So when it comes in shipment, you know how when you get a new phone, it has that clear plastic cover on it to make sure it doesn't get scratched in the box.
Mm-hmm.
So these cameras have that as well, except they're blue. So I was working with this camera for a couple of hours and I couldn't figure out why the image was darker than I expected, why it wouldn't focus. It just looked fuzzy and I couldn't figure out why till I realized that I didn't peel that blue cover off. So yeah, I effectively just forgot to take the lens cap off of the camera.
Did anyone else witness your mistake?
If they did, they were kind of just like floating around. It wasn't like anyone very obviously like knowing what I was doing. So they probably knew and they were just like, it happens to the best of us.
Or what about that moment of relief when you realized that that's what your issue was?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. Cause then it's like, at one point I probably thought the camera might be broken or something. So it was definitely good.
I can imagine. None of us are able to achieve success without help along the way. Is there a particular person who you're grateful towards for helping you get to where you are?
I'd say probably mostly my brother. Like I mentioned earlier, he is kind of the reason why I knew about engineering. If he wasn't interested in engineering, I probably wouldn't really have known about it for myself. For help with projects and, school stuff along the way as well. And just to kind of work my way through that and just kind of been a sounding board for a lot of different, work related things that not many people outside of work can really facilitate that kind of conversation. So yeah, I definitely say my brother.
Right. Can you tell us about a career accomplishment that you're particularly proud of?
Probably oh goodness, I guess it would be 2 years ago almost. I went to Chicago to a trade show called Automate. It's a trade show that happens every other year. And I was able to, while I was there, take an exam to become a certified vision professional at the advanced level. So they have two different levels. But I did the training all before I went, and I studied a lot to learn a lot of the nitty gritty theory, like the color wheel and more about how cameras operate and lens optics and things like that. So I was able to take that exam and I passed that. And that's probably one of the biggest relevant career accomplishments that I've had.
That's fantastic. I had a side question that just came into my mind. With all of your work during the workday with cameras and light and lenses, does it make you a better photographer on your off hours?
So it's yes and no. So yes, in the sense that it gives you a better understanding of how colors and light can impact your image. So for example, the difference between having a white LED in your living room versus the sunlight outside can change the color of whatever you're taking a picture of. So that's some part of it. And also what focal length lens to use, whether you're trying to take a picture of something close to you or far. But that's pretty basic knowledge among most amateur photographers with DSLRs. The reason why I said yes and no is because it all depends. Photography is all dependent on what you define a good image as. So with taking a picture of your dog or of a flower, you're really looking for realism. You're looking for colors to pop. You're looking for just the way that your eyes see it. You just want to capture that moment. With machine vision, it's different because you're trying to utilize angles and colors of light to almost create something that isn't there already. So you can use an angle of light to create a shadow that then can tell you whether a part's there or not. So it's kind of more of a specific application of photography that can sometimes be applicable to trying to take a picture of your dog, but in a lot of ways, it's very much its own beast.
Fair. What are your top 5 things I wish someone had told me before I started and why? Or what advice would you give to women seeking to begin a career in STEM?
I mean, the first one is kind of the most cliche advice anyone can give anyone, be yourself. And when it comes to being a female in a male dominated technology field, it really comes down to just don't feel like you need to change to fit the mold of what people expect you to be like as a person to be in that career. I've had people tell me you don't look like an engineer, and I still don't know what that means. I believe engineering is entirely in your mind, so how my looks factor into it, I don't know. So things like that, I've known women who are in male-dominated technical fields that feel that they can't be the feminine woman that they are, because they feel like they'll be judged for not being similar enough to their male colleagues. Like I said, I have funky colors on my nails because I like it, and I wear jewelry because I like it, and I, wear makeup and whatever. I do what makes me comfortable with being in my own skin while I'm at work, and that's really important. So yeah, definitely number one, don't change yourself just to fit the mold of what people expect of you. And then, that's the biggest one. I honestly can't really think too much beyond that at this point. No. I know I said some more in the past, but I don't really remember them at the moment.
No, that's okay. When we were chatting earlier, you had sort of talked about the different disciplines of engineering, and
yes,
and how relevant they are to the workplace.
Yeah. So, like I said earlier, my degree was very odd. It was very diverse, and it didn't really make me feel like I was ready for any job. I truly believe that going to school for engineering is a mindset. The theory that you learn is, it's relevant, of course. Like my theoretical physics helped me learn optics. Like it's a general way of thinking about certain types of information, but it's not the core fundamental foundation that you need. I guess, it is a foundation, but it's not the only thing that you need to work in a job. My uncle was a chemical engineer by schooling and a mechanical engineer by trade. He did his education and then at RMC in Kingston, spent his 4 years in the Army, and then basically didn't use the chemical side of his degree ever again. So there's so much to be said for study something that interests you, so that you want to study it, and then you'll find a job that fits you after.
And it kind of reiterates your point about how things went with Innovative, in that you sort of chatted about the fact that the nuts and bolts of what you're doing now, you didn't know before you worked there. It was all, they hired you based on the way you think and your ability to learn.
Exactly.
So yeah, I think that goes part and parcel. Same is true of librarianship. There's lots of things in librarianship that they don't teach you in library school. So real world experience will come. You also made another note about applying for jobs, whether you felt confident, whether your personality or your skills exactly matched that job description.
Yeah, so that ties back to what I was saying as well about how I didn't feel like my education really set me up for any particular job. I didn't feel ready for anything. But by putting yourself out there and applying for those positions that you feel like you would be good at anyways, if they can see that potential in you, then first of all, that's a company that you want to work for because they want to invest in you. And second of all, you can grow and you can learn on the job. It's so important to do that. And so, when you're applying for jobs, don't only apply for things that you have every qualification for, because chances are nobody does. So they're just going to hire the best candidate that they have in front of them. And that might be somebody who has less, hits less of the checkbox than somebody else, but they have this other quality that they're really looking for.
I'm going to put you on a spot a little bit with another question in when it comes to women in STEM, and specifically looking at young girls. Is there something you think that, in your opinion, either at the high school level or even younger, organizations like schools and libraries can do to help encourage more women look at pursuing careers in STEM or furthering their education in STEM?
It's kind of a hard question because
Yeah.
everyone is so unique that it kind of depends on the individual. But I think it really comes down to making those career opportunities known. Really advocating for the fact that you don't have to do your typical careers that everyone knows of or whatever. But especially when it comes to young girls, making sure that you're really making those careers known to them. Like I said, I was in grade 9 when I found out that engineering was a thing.
Mhm.
And then a friend of mine has been involved with like high school robotics teams, which is super cool, but not something that was available in my small town.
Yeah.
So things like that, and having those opportunities for young girls is super important. And I guess it really just comes down to you know really acknowledging the potential that girls have. And like it's funny because like all these technical careers have been dominated by men for so long, but there are studies that show that girls are actually better at math. And I don't really know the details on that, but it's a different thought process that women have, and it's been studied in different ways. Like women are better multitaskers, or however you want to put it. They're better at organizational or just logical thought processes and whatnot.
Mhm.
So it's just a different way of thinking, that when you really combine the two mentalities, that the approach that a man might take to a problem versus that a woman would take, when they work together, they can work together really well and come up with a better solution than either one of them could have up with on their own.
Mhm.
um, so just really seeing, I guess, taking it back to the children, just really seeing the potential there and making it very clear to them that you're not limited by anything. Whatever you're interested in, and explore it. I guess, yeah, just encouraging them and making things known. I guess that's really the biggest.
Yeah, no,
I don't know.
and increasing the visibility through things
Yeah.
like this, or like your brother for you, of being like, hey, this is a career, this is a thing you can do. Engineering is a thing, just the awareness, I think, too. Are you working on any cool projects right now?
I am. This week actually I was working on a trial. So I basically I take parts for machines that we're not actually building yet. Maybe we haven't even been given the job yet, and try and determine whether we can inspect something with a camera or not, or what it would take to inspect it. So that's a part of my job that only I do at the company. So this week I was working on one that I was taking pictures with a high resolution camera, and I wasn't doing the processing, but we were looking at it with automated intelligence or artificial intelligence. So we were taking, about 50 pictures of good parts and about 50 pictures of different bad parts, and training a system based on just looking at the good parts to be able to tell that the other ones are bad parts. So that's something that's super cool. It's one of the newer things in the industry right now, in terms of the technology has become more widely available, based on the hardware that's being developed.
Mhm.
It's been around for a little bit, but it was more cumbersome to implement, and with their project timelines, it wasn't really feasible. But they've gotten the technology to a point where it becomes more feasible now. So I was basically just telling a computer, here's good things, here's bad things. Okay, here's more bad things. Can you tell? Yay, it can tell. And it's really cool that a computer is capable of doing that.
That's
Um,
brilliant.
some people joke about the fact that AI is going to eliminate the need for my job. But there's actually some defects that the AI cannot find. Traditional vision, using what's called rules-based programming, actually has some benefits over the example-based programming, because there's so many features that the example-based is looking at that sometimes it can overlook something that seems obvious to you, but just from the way that it analyzes the parts, it says, no, that is mostly fine, so I'm going to call it good. So it depends on how it has a defect.
Mhm.
But there's still some rules based that I'm going to have to do for that project. So I still have a job. It's fine.
There's no getting rid of you anytime soon.
No.
If a project involves machine vision, you're involved. One of my other questions that just came to me is like, how long would you typically work on a project?
It depends on the project. So one of the more complicated projects that I did earlier on, so this was technically before I was a machine vision specialist. I was the controls programmer that programmed the 3D vision for a car part that we were putting liquid foam into, and then it would grow and expand into like a squishy foam. Okay. So you had to 3D scan it to make sure that it grew to be tall enough. So it had to go through like a curing process where it would do its whole growing phase, and then we would take the picture of it after. So I worked on that project for 6 to 8 months, I think, in total. Not solidly, I'd bounce off and do a couple of things in between, depending on what phase the project was at. But I did trails on it. I did, the final implementation on site as we were building the machine on site, and then I developed it all the way through to the final product. So for that one, really long time. For other ones where it's a fairly simple programming, it's just a matter of we need to make sure that the camera is going to be able to do the task. Then I'll just do like maybe a 4-hour trial on it, write up a quick report and give it back to mechanical design. And then they're like, yep, we can buy this camera. And then the programmer takes care of the programming because it's fairly straightforward. So it can vary.
Nice. There's always variety. I would imagine you're not very often bored.
No.
Well, my last question is, about, a librarian. I love books, obviously. So I wondered if you could tell us about a book that you love, and it doesn't necessarily need to be related to your career.
I'm a huge Harry Potter nerd. Absolutely huge Harry Potter nerd. I actually almost put on a Harry Potter sweater before starting this, but then I didn't. So I have read those too many times to count. But on, outside of that, I love like thriller novels. The suspense, what keeps you wanting to read more. It's always intrigued me. I've been a Mary Higgins Clark fan since I was, maybe like 8. Way younger than most people read Mary Higgins Clark, that's for sure. My grandma had a huge collection, and then, my mom and I would read them. So I was the weird, kid in grade 8 that had a Mary Higgins Clark book for their book report. So whatever.
Very mature reader. I love it.
So yeah, I definitely really enjoy that style of reading. So
that's great. Well, I'm with you on both accounts, the thrillers and the Harry Potter. I love that too. Ainsley, I want to thank you for taking the time to speak with us this evening. You found a way to make STEM seem less intimidating and more comprehensible for someone like myself, and I'm sure the others in the audience. We all need to learn these skills and to celebrate and recognize women like yourself in these positions as a way of demonstrating that visibility that I was talking about earlier for young girls and boys, so that they realize that there is a space for them in STEM fields. Thank you to you, our audience, for joining us. If STEM, or maybe even just general makers philosophy, is an area of interest for you, you may want to check out MPL's Virtual Midland Makers Group. Our Makerplace coordinator, Jennifer Whip, hosts weekly meetings with engaging speakers, exciting projects, and a chance to share and develop your own high and low tech interests. Last week, for example, they were discussing quilting. We conclude our interview series next week with our special guest, Lisa Bertram. Lisa is very much in keeping with the STEM theme. Lisa's the current president and CEO of Bertram Construction. She holds an MBA and is a professional engineer also. She joins us on Monday, March the 29th at 7 p.m. Thank you to everyone for joining us. Thank you so much, Ainsley, again for being here. It's such a pleasure to have you share your career journey with us, and happy International Women's Day, and have a great night.
Thank you. You as well. Thank you so much for having me.